Is the coronavirus vaccine safe? Nearly 40% of Americans say that when the vaccine is made available, they won't get it. But what do the scientists say? Today, we're going to talk to a former NIH scientist who says this could be one of the safest vaccines ever developed. Let's talk about it today on the Scientific Podcast. He holds a PhD in biochemistry and is the author of the award-winning book, The Works of His Hands, A Scientist's Journey from Atheism to Faith. And the introduction is written by noted Oxford theologian Alistair McGrath. He's been a tenured professor at New York University, Rutgers University, and the University of Pittsburgh. He was also the division director at the Center for Scientific Review at the National Institutes of Health and has published over 200 peer-reviewed scientific papers and 5 books. Currently, he serves as the editor-in-chief of the American Scientific Affiliation's online quarterly magazine, God and Nature. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Cy Garte. Dr. Garte, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. It's okay if I call you Cy for the duration
Absolutely.
of the podcast? Okay,
Sure.
great. So obviously, you know what's going on. There's a lot of talk about the coronavirus vaccine and that it could be released very soon and be available for distribution around the first of the year in 2021. And surprisingly, I've found that a lot of people, more than really should be, are concerned about the validity of the vaccine, the safety of the vaccine. Some estimates are putting as much as 40 to 50% of the population in the United States and in other parts of the Western world as well, who are refusing to get the vaccine. So let me just ask you straight up, based on your experience, based on your scientific expertise and everything you've seen and read and done in your career, do you think the coronavirus vaccine that's coming out is safe?
I do, but I should, of course, add the caveat that I'm not a vaccine expert. I have done work in research into infectious diseases. When I was at the NIH, the Institute of Infectious Diseases was one of my, Tony Fauci's institute was one of the ones that my division of grant reviewing covered. So I have some familiarity with that. And I know a little bit about how vaccines are tested and made and everything else. Now, in terms of safety, one thing I think I should say, it may be a little bit of a long answer, but I think it's appropriate, is that most people don't understand, and why should they, the complex process that goes into testing whether a vaccine is safe or not. In every vaccine, including this one, now, this one is exceptional for one particular reason, which we'll get to. But for every vaccine, in order to be approved, it has to go through 2 consecutive rounds of review. This is after the testing has been done and data has been collected in phase 1 trials. And in this case, it'll be phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trials. And the good part about including the phase 3 is it's a huge number of people. So roughly 20, well, if you count both of these vaccines, something like 40 or 50,000 people have gotten it. And during those trials, every time somebody coughs or has a hiccup, it's recorded. Now, who analyzes that data? And that's the important thing I want to get to. It's not the companies who make the vaccine, and it's not the FDA or the CDC staff. The FDA has a panel of outside experts, and that's very important. It's the same process that we use at NIH. I worked for the government, I worked for NIH, but I didn't make any decisions as to what grants got funded. That was done by panels of scientists who are mostly academics who come and meet. They have no axe to grind. They don't work for the government. They don't work for the industry. And they review the data. And that's done by the FDA. They convene a panel of experts, which in this case will meet, I believe, at the beginning of December. And they make a first decision. If that decision is positive, in other words, that the vaccine appears safe from the data that's been generated, it then goes to a different panel, this one run by the CDC. And they also look at the data. And they go a little bit deeper. They look into see not just is it safe, but for whom is it safe and for whom is it best suited, go into great detail. And again, that's a panel of outside scientific experts, have no connection. They're not paid by anybody. They get a small honorarium for their work, but they're not government employees and they're not private employees of the companies.
So the people who are reviewing the work, they're not the people who are conducting the research. So it's not like you get to grade your own test here.
They're at least 2 orders of magnitude apart, because you could say that the staff of the FDA and the CDC are 1 apart, because they contracted with the companies and they're helping the companies look at the data, but they don't review it either. It's independent. I could be one of them if I were in that field. And I have been an outside reviewer for other things, which I'm expert in. I'm not an expert in vaccines, so they wouldn't get me, but they are getting people I know who are experts in immunology and vaccine production. And this has been the way vaccines have been approved for decades, and it's no different in this case. I can't say it's safe now, but if those 2 panels say that it's safe, which I have a feeling they will, because what we know about the data is there's been almost no reports of any adverse effects. So if that is concluded, then I would say it is safe. There is one difference about this vaccine, which you're very well aware of, and so are the population, and that is it's come incredibly fast. I mean, nobody predicted that it would happen so quickly.
Right. And I think that's a lot of people's concern. I think it's a legitimate question to ask.
It is. Actually, it is.
Normally, vaccines take 10, 15, sometimes 20 years.
Well, yeah, several years. Several years,
at least several years. Depending on the kind of vaccine, it could take a decade or 2. And it goes through various trials and like you said, various outside sources testing and confirming data and stuff like that. So now we have a vaccine for distribution throughout the entire world that's been developed in less than a year. Exactly. Why should we trust that vaccine is safe?
Right. So the main problem that one could envision, let's assume for the sake of argument that the data comes out, all the data that's been gathered on the, 30 to 50,000, I don't know the total number of people, but all of that data turns out to be positive and meaning no ill effects were seen, or very few or very minor. That still leaves the question, well, okay, but first of all, it's not that huge a population. It's big, but it's not huge. And it's going to be given to, as you said, a lot more people. And second of all, what about longer term effects? Maybe there'll be some effects a few years down the road. Why would I take the vaccine anyway? And the reason is, and this is you have to think about this in a slightly different way. If this were a vaccine against the common cold, I wouldn't take it. And in fact, it wouldn't be made in less than a year because it's not that critical. If this were a vaccine, let's say we had a rampant Ebola epidemic, okay, with a 30, 40% fatality rate, I would take any vaccine that came out, even if it had never been tested, even if it had a 50% effectivity, because the disease is so serious and so deadly and so, widespread or so easy to spread that your standard for, risk of the vaccine changes compared to the risk of the disease.
Right. But I think some people are going to push back on you on that and say,
okay,
well, COVID-19 has a 99% recovery rate. It has less than 1% death rate. So why is this so important? Why is it so, why would you put it in a similar category as Ebola when the recovery rate is so much higher?
Well, again, that depends on the individual. This is a disease that is remarkably different from something like Ebola, which kills everybody. I would definitely not recommend giving this vaccine or any vaccine to children. They don't seem to, well, they certainly don't die of this disease. Now, there may be some long-term effects that are found in children, but again, that would take a lot more research to understand whether this vaccine would help that, what that frequency is. Okay, so there's still more we don't know. I don't think the first people to get it should be young adults, because again, their risk of death or long-term illness is much less, perhaps, than the potential risk from the vaccine. But for somebody like me, I'm 73 and I have underlying conditions, a couple of them. I would take it in a flash, because I'm quarantining myself to a high degree, because I think my chances of surviving this COVID-19 would be, not great.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Certainly way above the 1% level. I mean, probably more like 10 to 20%. And the chances of this vaccine, or pretty much any vaccine, I think, having a risk of that level is not. So I think what we're really talking about is, first of all, this vaccine should be administered immediately to people at high risk of exposure, even if their risk of death is not huge, because 1% is not small. So if you're a 50-year-old or a 45-year-old healthcare worker, a nurse or a doctor, you would probably want to get this vaccine fast, because your exposures are very high. Same could be true for other people who have no choice but to interact, like police officers or people. Certainly older people, absolutely. People with underlying conditions. There are some conditions that really seem to be bad, even if they're younger. And so those people also would definitely want to get the vaccine. Now, having said all that, that's assuming that there really is a high risk, which at this point is unknown. Mm-hmm. If it turns out that the risk is not very high, in fact, it's very low, then we really want to start vaccinating everyone, including younger folks, people in their 30s, 40s with no underlying condition, because that's the way we actually get this famous herd immunity.
Right.
And that will stop the disease.
Right.
So I don't know what I have to say President-elect Biden and his team will come up with, but my guess would be that it's not a matter of politics. This is just pure science, public health science.
Right.
Is it would be something like that there will be a phased use of the vaccine, and that will include a large population, several million people,
right,
which will also provide study data in terms of safety, in terms of adverse conditions. There may be some people who are allergic to the virus. Some of this will be known in advance. Some of this will unfortunately only come out after it starts to be used. But we have no alternative. Mm-hmm. What is the alternative to this? In the U.S. right now, the tragic stories are building up, yeah, and they're heart-wrenching. I mean, a young woman posted that her mother and her grandfather were both sick and they were dying together, and they both died, and she's alone. Wow. I mean, wow, this is happening thousands of times, a week now in the U.S. The virus is hitting people who didn't even know about it very much before, because they were, so I don't know what the alternative is to a vaccine. Despite all efforts, the therapeutics have not been extremely effective.
Right. Well, the alternative seems to be lockdowns and restrictions. And of course, that has impacts on other things besides just our own health.
No kidding.
Physically.
Yeah.
Okay. It keeps us, it protects us physically from getting the virus and whatnot, but it also has, so our physical health is somewhat managed, but mm-hmm, then the effects on our mental health, of the long-term effects of being in prolonged quarantine, and the effects on our relationships and friendships with family and friends. And there's a lot of other factors, the impact on the economy, and people are
right,
losing their jobs.
Right. Right.
So the alternative is not great, I guess is what I'm trying
I
to
don't
say.
really, no, I don't think so. I agree. I think it's not great. And I think it's not very healthy either, as you were saying.
Right, right, exactly. So let me ask the big question. This is the
Mhm.
$1 million question here. In all of your expertise, in your scientific training, and with your experience with the NIH and working there, the $1 million question: is there a microchip in the vaccine coming out? Is this the mark of the beast? Is that what we're seeing here?
No.
Oh,
I
whew.
have to tell you, Mario. Way back, I think it was in April or May. I had done a piece for Christianity Today,
Hmm.
and they put me on the podcast. They have a podcast called Quick to Listen, I believe, with this question. Not exactly this question, but a similar, a kind of related question was: should Christians specifically listen to scientists about the COVID situation? At that point, there's no vaccine in sight, but the question was, should they listen to the scientists who are saying this is a serious disease? It's not another little flu. It's not, minor.
Right.
Precautions should be taken. And why should they listen to these experts who are, not necessarily following the word of God and are not necessarily, in step with their faith? And as a scientist and a Christian, someone they knew, they came to ask me that question. And, I reminded them that Francis Collins is, in addition to Tony Fauci, Francis is actually Tony's boss. Francis Collins is a Christian, and a very devout Christian, evangelical, and, a brilliant scientist. And he's leading this effort. I don't think they need to be afraid that this is some kind of devilish plot or whatever.
It would be a bit ironic if the mark of the beast came through the research and scientific development of an evangelical Christian, don't you think?
It would be, yeah, it would be ironic, but there's so much irony in the world today that irony is not sufficient to rule something out, I'm afraid.
Absolutely. So then let me ask you this. We live in an age where at least I think some people would argue, well, we're on the coattails of this, but even if we're coming out of it, we're still somewhere around the age of scientific advancement. The age of science is the arbiter of truth, the most accurate depiction of reality. The most reliable knowledge is scientific knowledge. And after decades of hearing that mantra, how do we account for the fact that 50% of most people in the world, not just the US, but most people in the world, are skeptical of a scientific advancement? Is it because that message of scientific truth is the only form of truth hasn't worked? It hasn't had the impact that most people think it has? Or is there something else going on here?
Well, that's a really huge question, at least for me, because I've kind of devoted my life to, in a way, countering that message. I completely agree with it when it comes to the natural world, to understanding the natural world, to understanding, anything related to biology or physical health of the kind of thing we're talking about. I don't agree with it when it comes to other things like, why is the universe here? What is our purpose? What is the meaning of life? I am a Christian, and I believe that truth resides in the person of Jesus Christ. So, the big question, of course, is, can you do both? Can you say, well, science is the best way to find out the truth
Right.
about, and then you have to fill in that phrase. And then the question is, well, what if those two conflict? And that's the big question to me. And the big answer, which of course my whole book is dedicated to, and not just me, but many, many other people, including Francis Collins with his book, the language of God, and so many other people. And that is that there is no conflict, and that if you think there's a conflict, you're getting one of those two things wrong. You're either getting the truth of Jesus Christ wrong, or you're getting the scientific truth wrong.
Yeah.
because there's only one truth. And to make that argument, we can't do that now today here, but
Right.
that's an argument that I think is worth living for, and that's what I
Right. And it's actually, that was last week's episode topic, was science and the Bible. The question, when science and the Bible contradict, which one do we believe? And I went into a little bit of depth, as much as you can in a 10-minute video.
Right.
Talking
Did you have a guest on that, or?
No, unfortunately, it was just me. So,
Okay. No.
it would have been more fun if I had a guest. But essentially, what I said in the video, to summarize it, was the question is it's the wrong question, because the science and the Bible can't contradict, and so it's built on the assumption that science can somehow give theological knowledge, or that the Bible makes scientific claims. Perfect. And neither is true. And so it's not a question of how do you answer that question; it's a matter of the question's wrong.
Exactly.
So I think what I hear you saying is that the vaccine is, from what we know at this moment, mostly safe. There doesn't seem to be any adverse side effects. There's no microchip or mark of the beast that comes with it, and that it's something that we need to take seriously, but we also need to take cautiously. That, like you said, we shouldn't run out and give it to children and young people, but start with the most vulnerable people in our society. Start with the people who are most exposed to the population, things like first responders and people who work in public with the public, nurses, doctors, things like that, people like that. But then we kind of tied it up there with the interaction with science and faith. So let's maybe land there. Okay. So I've seen a lot of posts from people who are pro-vaccine saying that the vaccine is a way for us to love our neighbor, that, Jesus would want us to take the vaccine. But at the same time, we also want to be wise as serpents, but as harmless as doves. We don't, like you said, we don't want to run out and give this to children or people who, or younger people, because we don't know the side effects yet. So let's use science and faith together then to answer this question. When January 1st comes and the vaccine is made widely available, what should Christians do? What should our response to the vaccine be?
Well, I actually, there's one, before I answer that, may I include something that I forgot to say before about this, these vaccines.
Yeah, absolutely.
The two main vaccines, which are the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, both use this technique called messenger RNA. And I think a lot of people are not clear what that is. They may not have heard of it. I'm in the process actually of making a video for my YouTube channel about what mRNA is, messenger RNA. But one thing I will say very quickly here is that messenger RNA vaccine, although it's new, and this is another thing that some people are upset about, that it's never been used before in a vaccine, but the fact about messenger RNA is that it's one of the most natural products that exist. It's far safer than injecting live virus, which some vaccines have, or in some cases, there's a vaccine coming out using an adenovirus, which is the virus that causes colds. It's a deactivated adenovirus, but it's used as a carrier to bring the spike protein, or whatever the antigen is, into the cell. See, that's the problem with a vaccine. You can't just inject a protein and then get an immune response. You have to get it into cells. The nice thing about the messenger RNA is that it is the natural way that cells make proteins. So if you put in the messenger RNA for the coronavirus spike protein, the cell itself will make the spike protein. And there's nothing dangerous about the spike protein. It just sits on the outside and it helps the bad stuff get into the cell. So what you're doing is you're getting the cells to make their own spike protein. And when they do that, that encourages the antibodies to the immune response to occur. So it's actually it's inherently a much safer and more efficient way to produce a vaccine than anything that's been done. You could ask why it hasn't been done before, and that's a long, complicated answer, but we can get to it. I don't think we have time, but we could. So having said that, let me get back to your question. What should Christians do? I think that Christians have been handling this pandemic up till now very well in most cases, not in all cases. In my own case, for example, we have, as so many places in the U.S., churches. We have church service every Sunday online. We have hymns, we have music, we have the sermon. We see each other, we talk to each other. We have a daily prayer session run by the church and by the pastor and by some of us. And I think, we're all praying a lot. We're praying for those people we know who have been sick and who've died. We're praying for each other, for ourselves, and we should continue to do that. And we should pray for the success of this vaccine. And we should pray especially that this vaccine holds the promise, and I think it's the promise from God, that we will get out of this and that we will get back to our churches and we will get to sit in our pews next to each other.
And
we look forward to
love
that
each
day.
other like
And to love
Christ
each
loves
other.
the church.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And this vaccine is our best hope for that. So what should Christians do? They should embrace it. It's our best hope for return.
So you alluded to it just a few minutes ago. So I'll just close with this as the last question. January 1st, the vaccine's released. Will you get it?
Absolutely. If
All
I'm
right.
first on the list, but I probably won't be. But
If you could be the first on the list, though, you would.
As soon as I'm there, I will definitely get it.
All right. He's the former division director at the university, he's the former division director at the Center for Scientific Review of the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Cy Garte, PhD in biochemistry, and his book out, celebrating the 1-year anniversary of the publication of your book, The Works of His Hands, A Scientist's Journey from Atheism to Faith. If you want to learn more about Dr. Garte's journey out of atheism into the Christian faith and how science and faith played a role in that journey, you can pick up a copy of his book at a local retailer or at Amazon.com. Dr. Garte, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Mara.
If you have a question, you can feel free to email us. And if it's to Dr. Garte, you can send it to us and we'll forward it on to him. The email address is scienceandfaithdortmund@gmail.com. Go ahead and fire that away. If you have a comment, you can leave that obviously below here on YouTube in the comment section. And be sure to check out our website for more articles, and you can check out other episodes of the podcast as well. That's scienceandfaith.de. Thanks so much for joining us today on this week's episode of the Science and Faith Podcast, and we'll see you next time.